You got some live demos now, you got some best practices around microservices and so on and so forth. And one thing that I also always like to do is help people building a case for Camunda towards their management. And of course, doing that, that always works in a very different fashion, you know. So sometimes it's very much about numbers and ROI and business cases, and sometimes more on general level. So what kind of supplier is this really? Are we willing to work with them? So that's very different elements. So I've just picked a few. I'm going to share that with you. And let's just imagine that you're in that situation. If you're a developer, architect, project lead, team lead, whatever, you'd like to introduce this kind of technology, and your upper management are expecting some good arguments for that or have some questions about it. Maybe you're a freelancer consultant proposing this kind of technology to your customers, and again, there's certain questions that might come up. So let me just go through a few of them, and of course there's always stuff left, but this is really just some highlights. So kind of like, you know, preparing you for that kind of interaction. So for example, this one here, it's about Camunda the company. Very often we get this question, well, what kind of company are you actually? I mean, you're obviously not IBM or Oracle, so who are you really? Can we rely on you? Are you sustainable? What's your culture? Where you're based, etc. So to answer that, we're obviously from Germany, the accent gives it away. We're headquartered in Berlin. This is where we started the company 10 years ago. This is where I was born and raised, so we obviously have a strong relationship to that. Our whole almost our whole staff is based in Berlin, so we are all co-located in a very nice office there. The whole software engineering is there. We do have 2 additional small offices in North America, in San Francisco and Denver. So as we can also see here on the map, we do have a certain number of customers in the US and in Canada, which also tells a bit about the kind of markets that respond well to this kind of technology. We also have customers, of course, in the Nordics, like in Denmark and Sweden and in Norway, in Benelux. We don't have any customers in France, which is quite interesting. So of course this is also about culture and language. It's not too surprising really. As you can see, we are a German company with a global angle basically. Which also is to be explained by the fact that the technology is open source, so it did spread before we did any marketing in any certain territory. So we never, you know, had any marketing campaign in Brazil or in Australia before we received the first inquiries from people who wanted to use this technology, simply because it's open source. We are around 80 full-time employees now, again, vast majority based in Berlin. Of them, again, the majority being in software engineering. We have a consulting team, and of course the typical like, I don't want to say overhead, but you know, people in sales and marketing, administration. So, but just need as a software company. We're growing. I guess you could say we're growing rapidly. So we grew in terms of revenue around 80 to 90% last year. The years before that, we grew the annual recurring revenue by 100% each year. We were awarded by Deloitte as being one of the fastest German tech companies and in Europe. So we're doing this, and this is a bit special about us. We're not a typical tech startup, so there's no venture capital involved here. As I mentioned earlier, it's bootstrapped, so we're growing organically. We are profitable, always we're profitable, so we are fueling this growth with the revenue that we're generating. We're very much into workflow and decision automation. Sometimes executives want to hear that. You know, are they kind of thought leaders in a certain area? What's their passion? I explained it a bit this morning already. There's a certain evidence in the sense that, for example, we won the so-called BPM Next Award 2 years in a row. BPM Next is a conference in Santa Barbara, California, happening once a year, where BPM vendors present their innovation and their new features and things like that. And then, you know, people can vote which is considered most innovative. And we received that award in 2016 for our DMN, decision automation implementation, and in 2017 for ZB, which I explained already. So this, of course, you know, gives a certain credibility in this regards. And Bernd and I wrote a book about BPMN, and then later on also about DMN in 2009 already, which became quite successful, first in Germany. Then it was translated into Spanish and also into English. So the English version is this one here, Real Life BPMN. I think there are a few copies lying around. Are we allowed to take them away, Madeleine? If anyone wants to have one of those books, can I just grab it and run away with it? Okay, cool, awesome. So if you want to learn about BPMN, there's this book, I can recommend it, I wrote it. And yeah, it's also like, when you look it up on Amazon, there's like many 5-star ratings, which is cool. This is very, like, I'm bragging here, but again, you know, we need to build a case towards executives, so therefore, of course, we need to brag a bit about the company. Regarding customers, this is also often very important. So as I mentioned earlier, we have about 200 customers from different industries, partly very large organizations. You can see the growth here. So we started offering this product more as a pilot in 2012, then did the real thing 2013, and since then we have won a certain amount of customers per year, which is then added up here. And as you can see in 2018, I mean, this is the second quarter now, so it looks pretty good for us in terms of the further traction and growth of our customer base. What's also important, of course, is endorsements and references. So we're quite happy that our customers are quite happy, which means that in most cases we are able to bring you in touch with other customers in order to have reference calls and things like that. There are certain case studies available. For example, 24-hour fitness, they execute a lot of workflow instances, 20 million per day on Camunda, so this is helpful in terms of scalability measures. Companies such as Allianz or AXA Insurances and Generali Insurances, in that industry, for example, doing a lot of claim settlement and also sales processes around insurances with Camunda. In the telco industry, 1&1 is big in Germany, AT&T in the US, O2, Vodafone. So there's a good number of reference customers from different industries that are happy to share their use case and also explain why they picked Camunda, how they like it, any problems they had as well, of course, but also how they solved them. So again, this is absolutely available if anyone asks about it. People ask, okay, what kind of thing is this really, especially if they're not so familiar with this kind of technology. So it's important to understand that this is called a horizontal tech, which means it's not an industry solution of any kind. Horizontally means it goes across different verticals, aka industries, such as also stuff like, you know, Elasticsearch or Apache Kafka or other horizontal technology. And this means that we have this general value proposition of, you know, we're helping the development, ops, and visibility of automated workflows. This then turns into certain technical use cases, such as straight-through processing, which can involve then, of course, like the good old service orchestration, and we have this upcoming use case of microservices orchestration. So this is about, you know, totally automated workflows. Then we have the human workflow management. People are supposed to work to do stuff, so they get tasks assigned, which is also a very common use case. We heard about that with Dooney, for example. And we have this technical use case of business rule automation that we also cover with the decision tables, etc. So combining those use cases, there are many different, you know, industry-specific business process examples then. So Zalando is executing their orders on Camunda. There's different finance companies doing, yeah, well, stock trading or things around stock trading, like, for example, reporting certain trades to authorities. There's, as I said, insurances in the telco industry. There's a thing called OSS, which is about technical network management, and BSS, which is more about, you know, the customer-facing processes around it. So those are typical examples, but there's so many more. This is often also a challenge, of course. So we have 200 customers, and yes, there are some clusters of customers doing the same thing, but I would say there's not more than probably 5 or 10 who have the exact same kind of business process automated with Camunda. So it's like a very broad diversity of actual business process examples. And as I said, often as a combination of those technical use cases. Yeah, another interesting background is, of course, yeah, why are people approaching Camunda in the first place? What's their trigger, so to say? Okay, that's use case, but what's their trigger? And we just ran a webinar recently and asked the attendees. We had about, in total we had about 300 or so, and we asked some of them what was their motivation for using Camunda. And it's also interesting. So for example, almost a quarter said, well, because we wanted to replace an existing BPMS product. So we had a product from another vendor in-house, and we wanted to get rid of that because it was too heavyweight or not developer-friendly enough, too expensive, outdated, whatever. So this happens quite often. What also happens quite often, almost as, or actually a bit more often, according to this survey, is replacement of homegrown workflow tech. So as I said earlier, most of the time there are already workflows in place. It's not that they're starting from zero, many organizations. They're just implemented in a bad way. So for example, we have one customer who had his core process of delivering digital content to different marketplaces implemented on Oracle databases and stored procedures as like, PL/SQL. Yeah, exactly. So I'm seeing some eyebrows being raised. So this means that they had issues, with scalability and flexibility and of course also visibility. So they wanted to replace that homegrown stuff with something else that is still, again, flexible and developer friendly, but where they wouldn't have to reinvent the wheel. It's quite obvious. We have software vendors. For example, in California, there's a company called Gainsight, customer success management product. They wanted to provide workflow features within their tool. That's also quite often the case. When we think about drip campaigns in marketing, where we send out emails in a certain order, those drip campaign workflows are often configured in a drag and drop fashion. That is technically a subset of BPMN. So you can embed a BPMN workflow engine in your own product, provide a downstrip version of a BPMN modeler, like the one that we provide, inside your UI, and then allow for that, customization. So that's also relatively common. Of course, we have the situation that paper-based processes, for example, are being digitized, relatively clear, and we have the microservice situation, which is catching up rapidly right now. Quite interesting. All right. Yeah, I think I actually covered what I have written on these slides, so I don't have to repeat that. These are just some examples of other vendors' products that were replaced in the past with Camunda. That's always a bit like, say that. Awkward to actually mention those names, but at the same time, I think it's helpful to know that doesn't mean that our product is better. It's just that in like a significant amount of cases, our customers preferred it over the existing product they had in place. And there's of course a pattern in which situations that is relatively likely. For example, if you have developers, etc. and so on. All right. That's some other executive questions that we hear quite often. I mean, there's many more, but just some. So, for example, sometimes executives wonder, hey, can you do this low-code thing, where we can like point and click and drag and drop the workflows, and then we don't need to do so much software development because it's model-driven, and then we're all much more productive, and I would actually like to get rid of my programmers anyway. Now, that's not what they're really saying, but sometimes it's what we're reading between the lines. So that's of course coming up quite often, and sometimes in conjunction the skepticism towards open source. I mean, fun fact is, when you license Camunda Enterprise, you license it in the exact same way like you would license any other vendor's product. So it's just the same thing. It's called dual license approach. However, still, of course, we're pushing this open source argument a lot, because even if you license the enterprise platform, you're still working with code that is available open source, which has certain advantages in terms of ecosystem, etc. So we're pushing this a lot, and therefore, of course, we're also hearing or being challenged by especially more conservative executives about this open source thing. So let's look at those two questions first, relatively quickly. So what we find important to understand is, and I think that Fritz mentioned that, the question, okay, you are a bank or an insurance or a telco company, or you create tissues, napkins. So to what extent do you consider yourself being actually a software company? And that is something that if I would ask this question, or had asked this question 10 years ago, insurance people or bank people would have said, well, we're not techies, we're in this specific industry, we know our stuff, and then yeah, we need some tech for doing this. But times are changing rapidly right now. And for example, Goldman Sachs, they're now they're defining themselves as a tech company. I would say as a tech company with a certain appetite for money, but primarily a tech company. JP Morgan Chase, similar situation. What's interesting is when you look it up, the ratio of software engineer job postings that they publish compared to their overall job postings. You can see that in those two cases specifically, the ratio is significantly higher than with other players in the market. So they're really pushing this, and you can hear it in their public announcement, in their press releases, etc. You can also see it over time. In JPMC's case, how this happened as an uptick. So they are pivoting towards becoming a tech company, while tech companies are pushing into certain other markets. We're thinking of fintechs, insurtechs, legal techs. We know some of them like PayPal. We know also companies such as Amazon who do stuff that we wouldn't have imagined them doing 10 years ago. So why wouldn't they sell insurances very soon? Well, they're actually doing already. So, so we have this like convergence of traditional tech companies and industry-specific companies becoming tech companies. Goldman Sachs, for example, they are also going to present how they're using Camunda for their global workflow infrastructure, thousands of business processes being managed with an infrastructure that they have created with Camunda inside. So that's also quite interesting, of course. And speaking of Goldman Sachs, they're using the open source platform, in fact, of Camunda BPM. They're now looking also at the enterprise offering, but they're using the open source platform. So they're obviously also, there's something going on about open source. And they are keen on presenting at Camunda Day in New York in 2 weeks. They're also going to present at Camunda Con in Berlin in September, and they really want that. And why? Because they want to get exposure in the open source ecosystem. So why would they want to get exposure in that ecosystem? And there's a lot of reasons that you can make up about, you know, attracting talent, etc. But it's really part of a broader thing that we can see across different big organizations and industries. So that's an interesting other example or article that I would like you to become aware of, where they're also looking at lots of open source projects and how they're being adapted and used and also pushed by certain companies. They're also, for example, mentioning Goldman Sachs here, who are now establishing an open source first approach. And yeah, actually we also had the conversation with AT&T 1 or 2 years ago when they reached out to us and said, hey, we're looking at Camunda now. And we asked, okay, so why are you looking at Camunda? I mean, we like it, but why are you looking at it? And the answer was, among other things, well, we have this open source first approach now. Well, they didn't say open source first, to be honest, but they said that we are looking specifically at open source technology now. It's part of our strategy for different reasons. A few weeks ago, Microsoft acquired GitHub. Reactions were very different, you know. Some people said, what's GitHub? Other people said, oh wow, 7.5 billion, that's quite a lot. Some said, why would they do that? And others said, oh my god, I need to migrate from GitHub because I need to get away from Microsoft, which is so proprietary, and you know, that's like, they still have this mindset about Microsoft 20 years ago. But things are changing, again. So Microsoft is obviously embracing open source on a large scale, like big time. So why would they do that? And you can read it up in their press release. So what they're saying is, and that's quite interesting, that's Microsoft saying, today, every company is becoming a software company. That's what we just learned about Goldman Sachs. And developers are at the center of digital transformation. They drive, and now they're doing us a favor, they drive business processes, here we are again, functions across organizations, customer service, etc. And the choices the developers make will increasingly determine value creation and growth across every industry. So the developers are becoming now the centerpiece of what's going on around this digital transformation. And that is a shift which some executives have not yet entirely realized. So, of course, it depends on, you know, which angle you take. This is our angle, so we are convinced that this is true, and that therefore also developer-oriented tech is superior to tech that basically says, I'm trying to get rid of my developers by model-driven development. Those are two very different paths. So, in a nutshell, what we, you know, sometimes I'm now giving you kind of a presentation, part of a presentation that I'm sometimes giving, or that sometimes presenting towards executives. You know, and get invited by our champions. They say, hey, we need to convince our board. Could you please give a presentation about Camunda or how you see the future of workflow automation? And they can say, you know, Mr. CEO is coming in, so it's like a bit kind of the mascot here. And then I give this kind of presentation. Of course, you know, when you do this, you need to decide, do you want to sell or do you simply want to share what you believe in? Because many times when I'm telling this, I get pushback. Of course, not everyone likes to hear what I'm saying. But I believe it doesn't make sense if any organization uses us that have not really understood the principles that we are building our product upon. So what we firmly believe is, if you want to do this thing called digital transformation, you need to start seeing yourself as a software company. It doesn't matter what industry you're in. If it's napkins, if it's banks, if it's insurances, you are a software company with a certain angle, with a certain flavor. You need to invest in very good software engineering. Yes, we're all suffering from the lack of talent, etc., etc. That's no excuse. The solution is not needing less engineers. The solution can only be making sure you're getting the best engineers and you groom them and you keep them happy, and also, of course, you develop them. There's a lot of stuff that you can do around that. Let it be building up engineering centers in countries that you would think of right away, like good, not sweatshops, or starting working remotely. There's a lot of things that we can do nowadays in order to make this happen. When you look up, for example, Goldman Sachs and GitHub and Google, you will find their repository. So Goldman Sachs are not just using open source, they're also building open source stuff and open sourcing that themselves then, making it available in order to become an active member of the open source ecosystem. I mentioned ING Bank earlier and Uber and Netflix, same thing of course. But it's now kind of spilling over in the more conservative industries. And also very important, yesterday we had a number of customers from Germany invited to our office and had some workshop around that. That was very interesting. Of course, many industries, many organizations are not greenfield startups, so they do have legacy in terms of, let's say, mainframes and COBOL logic or whatever, and they don't dare touching that. And they cannot afford, not doing this any longer. That's what we also believe. So we have to embrace change in terms of changing our technology stack and the way we've implemented processes again and again in shorter cycles, in short release cycles. And all this stuff about continuous integration is about exactly that and other things, all the way back to agile paradigms. We don't believe in this. We don't believe you can run your core business entirely on off-the-shelf software products. People tried that. Companies like SAP became very successful because of that. Always worked to a certain extent, but we don't think it's working anymore for this kind of companies. As I said, we must get rid of legacy tech, and of course, legacy is anything that is older than 3 years, and we haven't touched within 3 years. Probably, some would argue 3 months, but that's of course a matter of taste. Doesn't need to be about COBOL, it can also be a Java. Of course, my Java EE application was CDI that I really loved 10 years ago. Oh, well, that's legacy, so we need to look at that as well. And once we're if we're not willing or able to do this kind of invest on an ongoing basis, we will become legacy ourselves very quickly. I don't know about Denmark and Germany. Still, many companies treat their own IT department as if they were an external supplier. They're trying to put the pressure of the market on their own staff because sometimes it's even ideology, I believe. But nevertheless, this wouldn't work. I think I need to. How much time do I have left, really? I'm now missing my phone. 7 minutes. 7? Yeah. Okay, I will not explain why they shouldn't do this, because I don't have the time for that, but anyways. Okay, this is really just some random questions that are coming up lately. And for example, robotic process automation. Who has heard of robotic process automation? Just raise your hand if you have heard of robotic process automation. Who is actually using robotic process automation? Yeah, I expected that. Of course, some use it, but it's one of those topics that are kind of hot these days. And this is why you need to, expect it to be brought up during a board meeting, for example, because some executive, some CIO or CEO had a meeting or golf play with someone from some big vendor, and they say you need to do this robotics thing, it's all about robots now, and then they go crazy about it. So what is it really about? When you Google robotic process automation, you will find lots of robot pictures. Really like a robot typing in stuff in a keyboard, a robot doing a phone call, people getting, hair groomed by robots, robots doing all kind of stuff and being happy about it. So this topic is overloaded with this association of robots. And this is a very emotional topic. So it's a big bubble, really. Doesn't mean that there's no value in this topic. So I'm going to try to explain what value we actually have. Problem is, it is very vendor-driven. So this is, for example, one of the vendors, and we don't have any relationship with them, not negative or positive, so that's really just an example. But when you look at their website, you really see the tone, the tune they're playing. Saying, yeah, robots, introducing the general for your army of robots. So people get very, emotionally attached to that. And even better, it's a foolproof development tool, which tells a bit about the kind of personas they're selling this to. And then we have this, this actual tool itself, which I always find most helpful because it's like tangible. So what can I do here? I can see kind of a flow, okay, fair enough process. Log into Salesforce, search contact, some decision, then get information, create CSV file, email, candidate sheet, notify user, search again, yes, no. This is what I'm seeing here. So obviously, some routine that logs into Salesforce and doing certain stuff here. We look a bit deeper, you will find the tool itself. And I mean, it's not that rocket science after all. We still have to click on a 3.5 inches floppy disk to save, and we have this kind of user interface where we can say, on certain circumstances, look at certain stuff in my UI, and then enter certain data into certain fields. What's the whole idea? If you remember the good old macro recorder in Windows, then you know pretty much what this is about. It's about automating the way someone is using a user interface that's the robot, a macro that is executed. Why would I do that? Well, because I have legacy applications, potentially, that do not have any API. Not SOAP, not REST, not whatever. So in those cases, people sometimes use this as a workaround. So this legacy application has a user interface that is today being used by my human workers, and now I can use this RPA product like a macro recorder on steroids, which will then act as an automated user. And this is where the whole robot association comes from. So it's like a bit, we need to get this straight, because otherwise people will expect all kind of things from these RPA tools. Well, that's nice. This is a RPA flow expressed in BPMN, so of course I could do that as well. What's important to understand though is that this is always a very kind of island solution. So for example, if we have two systems, let's say a CRM system and an ERP system, then I would have one RPA flow for that CRM system, and then of course I totally decoupled RPA flow for handling my order creation in that ERP system. I might be able to connect them somehow, but maybe not. And as soon as I'm looking at steps that are about, again, API service calls, the RPA product won't help me here. So in other words, how much time? 2? Oh my God. Okay, so in other words, what we have seen is customers integrating Camunda as a workflow engine for the holistic business process execution with RPA tools in order to use them as adapters for the legacy applications. Yes, you can do that. You can even have hybrid situations where you have, modern microservices, typical services, request response pattern wise, human task workers, and RPA tools. There's a lot of caveats here that I also learned about yesterday, like for example, but if the UI changes for whatever reason, you will need to retrain your RPA tool, stuff like that. So I would really be careful about this. I wouldn't expect too much, but it can be a temporary remedy if you don't have any API. But again, be aware what it isn't, especially be aware it's not anything with robots. So just to make sure. 1 minute, right? Okay, well, we're also going to share the slides, don't we? Good, so you can also read it up. In a nutshell, the summary of these slides is, I think we also heard it at Duni. They did it exactly right. Don't do the big bang introduction and forcing everyone to use Camunda now. This is always a bad idea. It's always much better to have a first project that is not too big, not too complex, at the same time significant enough that you can actually create value by doing the project. It's always super crucial to prove success once you went live. In the best case, you have KPIs defined that reflect the initial motivation for this whole project, like cutting the cycle time by 50% or whatever. And once you have those KPIs defined, you can track them, for example, using Optimize. This is what it's built for, and then communicate them strategically in order to get the buy-in for the horizontal rollout of this technology in other projects. In the best case, of course, people come to you. So they see, you're using Camunda for this kind of problem. This is really impressive, seems to work well. Well, we have a similar problem, so we would love to use this as well. That's the best thing that can happen to you, and it actually happens quite often. And that's also what we love to see happening, much more than this top-down, enforced introduction of this technology, just because someone, needs to, build a case for their idea. Okay, again, yeah, could have elaborated on this a bit more, but I think the main point came across. I'm happy to, of course, chat about that later. And now I still in time, right? Yes. Ha, which is most important. Good job. Cool, thank you. That's the tuner, right?